Welcome back to the 76 Capital Sports Leadership Show. My name is Wayne Kimmel, managing partner of 76 Capital and host of this podcast. My guest on this episode is Brian Tierney. Brian is the founder and CEO of Brian Communications, and over a 25-year career, he's represented global brands like Comcast, Deloitte, Uber. He's also led an investor group that acquired the Philadelphia Inquirer, and during that time as publisher, they earned a Pulitzer Prize. Brian has played an amazing role in bringing the World Cup to Philadelphia, the Pope to Philadelphia, and these are the two biggest events in the history of Philadelphia, and Brian's been in the middle of it all, building relationships, making things happen in Philadelphia, and quite frankly, all across the country. And if you don't know Brian, you're going to get a great chance to meet someone who I would call a friend, a supporter, and someone who's been in the trenches with us over the years, and I'm really excited about this conversation. Brian, welcome to the 76 Capital Sports Leadership Show.
Thank you, Wayne. It's fun to be here and to be a part of this. And when I think back sometimes about the history, and in the fact that I'm 23 and you're 19 now. Oh yeah, right. Anyway, times three. But anyway, but it is fun to think about kind of where things began and where I am now.
Well, it's crazy. As you say that, we both are alums of the great Widener University School of Law, which is now Delaware Law School. And we met back in the late 90s. This was the first time that we met. And I'll never forget about our breakfast meeting that we had at the Radnor Hotel in the suburbs of Philadelphia. And you had just recently sold your business and your name, which we'll get into. And there's been so many things that you've been involved with. Talk about, some of the, what are some of the things that have made you successful as a CEO, as an entrepreneur, as a business person?
I'll start kind of going back, and sometimes when I think back in my life, I realized what happened in first grade was kind of a big moment. My mom was a waitress at the Bellevue. My dad worked for the Insurance Company of North America, which is the INA and Cigna now. He was a claims adjuster, later had a glass shop called Garrett Glass in Upper Darby. But when I was in first grade, I ran for class president. Mom helped me with my poster. And I came home that day and she said, "Brian, how did it go?" And I said, "Oh, I didn't win. Michael won." It was one of my classmates. And she said, "Oh, well, Brian, I'm so glad you tried." And she gave me a hug. And about 5 minutes later, she looked at me and she said, "Brian, who did you vote for?" And I said, "Well, Mom, I felt kind of funny voting for myself. So I voted for Michael too." And she kissed me and said, "Brian, if you don't vote for yourself in life, why should someone else? You have to vote for yourself if you have confidence in it." And I remember thinking, that's an interesting. So cut to, that's part of my life going forward, including when I'm 17 years old, my parents get a mailer that the Democrats are looking for somebody to run for township commissioner. I'm still in high school. And I said to my mom and dad, "Gee, I turn 18 next month. The election's 2 months later. So maybe I'll run for township commissioner." So the first time I could vote in history, when I was 18 years old, I was able to vote for myself. I got about 36% of the vote. But, and so that's been kind of part of it. It's lots of times I call it, basically systemic optimism, existential optimism, whatever, like being practical, but also thinking about what, everybody will tell you what can happen. And I appreciate that. And you want to hear that. But what if we won? Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that we did win. How did that happen? And how can we work towards that? And that's been a fundamental part of my life, even through really challenging times.
Well, there's been amazing things that you've done that you've won. How many times I'm sure someone said, "Oh, well, could you have a president come to one of your events? Could you have the Pope come to Philadelphia? That'll never happen. How are you going to, buy a newspaper? Okay. Bringing the World Cup to Philadelphia. All these things that you've been involved with, these are things that like most people have been like, yeah, that's impossible. Like, how did you actually make these things happen?
It's funny. I've met two popes, and I haven't met the one from Villanova yet, so that'll be soon. I've met every president since Richard Nixon. When I first met Nixon, I was 12 years old on a school trip down to Washington, D.C., and happenstance, he was walking from the Capitol to get into his car. He had a can of V8 tomato juice that was empty on the floor of the thing. I remember looking in the car. But anyway, so it's just, getting out there, meeting people, and seeing things, and again, just dreaming, being practical, but just kind of dreaming what might kind of be able to happen. And a lot of people, when I've been able to start and then purchase and then grow and then sell 3 advertising agencies to publicly traded companies. And these were, the one particular agency was really struggling when I got in there. And I thought, okay, I'm not an advertising man. I'm more of a public relations messaging person, but let's figure this out. And they wanted to hire me, and I said, would you sell it instead? And the guy who I was dealing with in New York said, Brian, we lost $1 million last year. It's going to lose more money now. You'd be great to run it. It makes no sense to try to buy it. So I went back to them the next day and I said, how about if you credit me 50 cents on every dollar of profit I can make for you towards this purchase price of $4.5 million, which we know it's not worth, but that's your losses on the books. And give me 3 years to do it. And he said, I think you're a fool to do it, but if that's what you want to do. And long story short, I was able to get great creative talent. I was able to recruit a guy named Rich Russo, who was Donnie Deutsch's creative director, who at first didn't even want to meet me in public, but was willing to have breakfast in my hotel room. And then we met, we really hit it off, and he's now the CEO of Arnold Advertising in New York. And by bringing him in and others, we grew it from about 50 people to more than 200 people, and I earned it out in 3 years. And then they asked me they bought it back from me, and I stayed another 5. And that's just an example. And then also, I've had other experiences too. You guys were involved too with Nutrisystem. I mean, I was the longest serving member of the board there. We took it from 72 cents a share to finally sold it at $42. But it was Mike Hagan's leadership and what he was able to do and just kind of thinking about things. I love working around smart people because I learn from them too, which is fantastic. I'm constantly observing and learning. And one final thing I'll say in this area is to try new ways to do things. Like I literally will drive different ways home sometimes just to see what it's like if I take this road versus the one I always take. And I read things that, a little old school in that I'm online constantly, but I also read physical papers, particularly on the weekends. And I'll have the New York Times and the FT and the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Wall Street Journal. And I can't tell you how often somebody says, well, how do you know that? And I read the paper because I wouldn't read online. The algorithm's not going to feed me fashion articles, but I might read something as I turn a page of a fashion article, and there's something that could be applicable to a healthcare client as well. Some aspect of that could maybe make sense if we did it this way. And I loved it. One last thing in this way, I had a client about a year ago. You know him. I won't mention his name, but a CEO of a major operation. And we get together every 2 months or so, talk about the business, but also just some ideas. And he left my office, and I got a quote. Is everything all right? Yeah, just got a quick question for you, Brian. What's that? Where do you get all these great ideas? I leave your office so pumped up and optimistic. And that was just like, dear diary, today was a particularly wonderful conversation I had. So anyway, it's that sort of thing. Let's talk about what can happen. We can win. What do we need to do it? And get the negative people kind of, I've found sometimes negative folks, as you win, get more negative because they're getting proven wrong. And, you just have to, you have to sometimes make some tough decisions that way.
I mean, what's always drawn me to you, and I love our conversations, is exactly what you just said, your optimism. You're being able to say, let's just figure this out. So how do you do that? You've had all these incredible clients, I said earlier, the Comcast, the Deloittes, the Ubers, and all these big clients that you've worked with, all these people like you mentioned, Mike Hagan at Nutrisystem, these amazing CEOs that you've worked with. How do you sort of transfer your optimism and be able to then kind of bring it to life with and for them as a client?
Yeah, and partly I think it's storytelling. First of all, it's on the front end, trying to find people who really have, you can tell these people have been through maybe some tough challenges, but they fundamentally have had experiences where they think things can kind of work out. I mean, I grew up, mom, dad working both hard. Sometimes the phone got turned off because they couldn't pay the bill. And, and there was one period of time for about a year that 4 boys and mom and dad in a 2-bedroom basement apartment. Now, then, we were able to get out of that. Mom hit the number before there was a legal lottery. She was working as a waitress, and you could hit the number, and we were able to get a new house in Springfield that my brother Kevin still owns. But so I mean, that's part of it. It's to remind people of those things that can happen. It's to celebrate those moments. I mean, this conference room where we're in now, this is my conference room. I have examples of some of those things that, like, people that I've met, some of the presidents, the Pope, when I met him both in Philadelphia, as well as we were asked to help in terms of when the Pope was going to Ireland 3 years later. And we organized that whole event. And right behind me, there's a picture of Bono. Bono was winning something called the Liberty Medal in Philadelphia. And I was publisher of the Philadelphia Inquirer. And I said to the folks running it, God, I'd love to have Bono come by the newsroom. And they said, oh, that can't possibly happen. Brian, that sounds good, but that. So what I did, though, is did a little homework, and I was really admired what he was doing in Africa. And I got a letter to him saying I really admired what he was doing in Africa. It was inspirational in terms of all the different things he was doing. And we were going to do a special section of the Philadelphia Inquirer about his work and put it in the Sunday paper. And then also we're going to distribute it to high school students in the 8-county area. And then finally, I just said, oh, and by the way, if you have a few moments, I'd love to have you come visit the Inquirer. The next thing you know, I get a call. What the hell did you do? Why? Bono says he's coming by. He spent 3 hours. He sang opera in the lobby when he walked in. He toured the Inquirer newsroom, the Daily News newsroom, and then he sat in my office and told stories. And behind me, you'll see there's the front page of the Daily News that day that he did a cartoon on it on his eyes. And then 3 weeks later wrote me that beautiful handwritten note that's next to it as well, saying, how much he enjoyed visiting the Inquirer and he appreciated everything. So, like, kindness goes a long way, I mean, that's kind of it. But, there's a line in Hamlet when I was in 9th grade, I think, nothing is anything but thinking make it so. And that idea of, like, yeah, I can look at it this way or this way. Nothing is anything but thinking make it so. And that hit me as a young boy when I read it.
It's amazing. I mean, I remember your office at the top of the Inquirer building. It was the famous office of the
Walter
famous
Annenberg.
publisher.
Yeah,
Walter Annenberg. And, it was just one of those things where, it was sort of, but you made it so inviting. It wasn't just like Brian's up here, but you brought everyone there. You brought people together. It felt like that was something, that's one of your sort of special superpowers, I believe.
Well, Wayne, it's funny or interesting you bring that up because, one of the things when we put together the group and we bought the Inquirer and Daily News, and amazingly we won the Pulitzer Prize. We had the fastest growing news site in America over the 4 years I was there. Unfortunately, a lot of economic things changed. So ad rates went from $17 a 1,000 pages to 1. So we went through a restructuring. But one of the things is I was running before that the largest advertising agency in the region. And although the 6 ABC and the other, news outlets would invite you by occasionally to have a cup of coffee, I was never invited in the building. And it was just their culture of not kind of like, well, so one of the things I did is start to have events there. And like I invited the president of American Airlines, he came by and loved touring the newsroom. Bono, all these people, and one of the things that, and it made the employees feel really like, wow, this is really cool. Like big name people from the arts, from business, et cetera, from philanthropy want to come by and visit. And they felt better about when they go home and they tell their spouse, hey, who was in the office today? He just toured the newsroom, so-and-so. Oh, that's really neat. So it was like hidden in plain sight, but nobody ever did it. And one of the things that, and I still have that photograph here, when you got off of the elevator onto the floor where my offices were, and there was an outdoor patio and stuff like this, again, that nobody ever used, is I had a beautiful, haunting photograph. Several years before that, there had been this horrible Amish school shooting, and the front page of the Inquirer had this powerful photo of these young people in a horse and carriage beautifully done, the sadness of it at the same time, just it was so powerful. And I found out that the photographer who had taken that picture, I said, gee, she hadn't stood where everybody else was standing. She found a different location. She climbed a tree, Jessica, and she was up there for 4 or 5 hours to get that shot. So I love the idea of really talented, finding a new way to do things, not standing where everybody else was. And I thought that kind of symbolized what I was trying to do at the paper. So when you got off the elevator, when the CEO of American Airlines or other leaders came, the governor, stuff like that, that's the first thing they saw. And it was just the opportunity to tell that story. And it resonates with people.
Absolutely, absolutely. Talking about the kinds of relationships that you've built over the years, you and Dan Hilferty, who is now the CEO of Comcast Spectacor, and also the chair of Philadelphia FIFA 2026, and bringing the World Cup to Philadelphia. How did you guys meet, and how did that whole relationship come together, and your overall involvement in FIFA?
Dan, we realized in hindsight, he was a year ahead of me in my grade school. We didn't know each other, and he left in, I think, 5th grade because his family moved down to the shore. So we had that early connection. And then I knew him. I'd met him several times when he was at St. Joseph's University and in other world of things like that. And when he became the CEO of Independence Blue Cross, my old agency had won that business. This is kind of a funny story. His predecessor was a guy named Fred DeBona, legendary CEO. And this was 1995 or so. We'd gotten into the advertising business. And that was really starting to grow. And I got a call that Fred wanted to talk to me, and I knew Fred, and I went over there. Mr. DeBona, how are you? Brian, good to see you. Tell me what you're doing. Oh, I've got this going and this going on. And in the middle, after about 5 minutes, he got up out of his chair, he pointed to me, and he said, "You got our advertising." I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "You got our advertising. You're an effing warrior." He mentioned a very well-known attorney in town. He's my lawyer. He's a warrior. You got the business. So I went back to my office in the Bellevue, again, where my mom had been a waitress, and now I'm the largest tenant in the building. How did your meeting go with Fred? We just won the Independence Blue Cross business. So anyway, that was the entire RFP process. But that's building a reputation and delivering, that people see it. So then several years later, I was at the Inquirer, and then Dan was over at Independence, and he hired my new agency, retained us in to kind of work with him. And what was great about Dan is Dan is like, he gets the big picture, but he's also the person who, when he walks through the lobby of the building, is talking to the team, security guards. He's able to balance, and not balance, 1 + 1 = 3, the most sophisticated that you can think of in terms of things about, innovation, partnerships. Let's try this with this company and growing Independence, incredibly. And then in retirement, after he stepped out of that role, he started Duneview Strategies, and actually rented space here in the building right down the hallway from where my offices are at 123 South Broad. Our building is in Philadelphia, and it's doing quite well. And it's 123 South Broad is the address, but some may know it as the Duke and Duke building from Trading Places, the old Eddie Murphy movie. But anyway, and then Dan came up with the idea of, Brian, with all of the going on in this region with healthcare, in terms of pharma, in terms of the University of Pennsylvania and independence and innovation and all the other things going on, Cencora, why don't we create a conference? So we created the Health Key Conference, and it was his idea, and that's kind of where Dan is. He comes up with these great ideas, and as part of it, we had one of the days was at Comcast, and Dan interviewed Brian Roberts, and they'd known each other for a really long time, obviously, from being here in the business community. But at the end of that, I think a day or two later, Brian reached out to Dan and let's get together, and why don't you come in and run Comcast Spectacor? I mean, so it was, an amazing, so it's the arena, it's the Flyers team, and it's everything else around it as well. And now being transformed once again. Dan's one of those guys that when he gets involved with something, again, optimistic, let's figure it out. Let's not think about what can happen. Let's let's understand that, but then let's talk about what could happen. And that's why it's so cool to work with a guy like that.
So you work with him on the Comcast Spectacor side of things with your company, Bryan Communications. You also
Yes.
are involved with him on the Philadelphia 2026 FIFA effort, and that's coming this summer. What's that been like?
It's been I mean, the community, I think partly because of I'll step back for a second. In the 27 years ago or so, Philadelphia never had a tourism campaign, advertising campaign, and a woman named Merle Levitz came in to run this new part that was going to be started. And I was very fortunate we won the advertising business. And when we did the research, one of the things that was fascinating is that we found that Philadelphians sometimes had a worse view of Philadelphia than out-of-towners. They were like, people really like that? Yeah, oh, yeah, okay. So the first campaign is we had non-Philadelphians who had spent time in Philadelphia talking about how much they loved their time in Philadelphia. Oprah Winfrey, who had made a movie here, she talked about, that's my Philadelphia. She liked walking down this street and going to this area, and this Ken Burns, people like that. And it was the third party saying, trust me, you have a really great place that you're living in, that got people excited about being in Philadelphia. So that helped really launch the tourism. I think having that later on, the Republican National Convention, the Democratic National Convention, the Pope coming here as well, people realizing, you know what, we should be really proud. And so the idea of could we do the World Cup? Let's go for it, and winning it. And I think that people, one of the things that is so exciting about it is not only, they say that for every one person who has a ticket, 3 or 4 people will come from that country to just be in the city during it. And I think it's just going to be a time of big smiles and people coming from around the world and telling the story of this region, the proximity to New York and Washington and all the rest of it, but all the different things it has right here. It's going to be terrific as well. And now we're also getting involved about, Philadelphia is one of the finalists to have the 2028 Democratic National Convention. So we're helping tell that story as well, working with Dan is one of the co-chairmen, David L. Cohen as well, about trying to get that story and helping them pull that together, so that I think we're down to 1 of 5 that they're looking at right now. Once things happen, people realize, well, we can, you can get a date. Trust me, okay? Let's go out, we can get you a date.
Well, look, I mean, again, it's amazing all the things that you've done. I mean, you've been a mainstay on ABC's show Inside Story in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Almost 40 years, I think you've been on that show.
Yeah,
I mean,
it is.
Why do you do that show, and what does it mean to you?
Well, there's a great example too. So, I'm 29, 30 years old, and I get a call from somebody who I don't know, but he had heard of me, and his name was Michael Cassio, a great guy. He was the number 2 person at 6 ABC. And he said, Brian, we're going to start this new show called Inside Story. Oh, okay. And it's going to have Irv Homer. Oh my gosh, Irv Homer was the number 1 radio talk show person in the region, and one of the best in the country. A woman named Carol Saline, who was an editor at Philadelphia Magazine. Oh, I've read about her. I've never met her. Chuck Stone, a legendary columnist from the Daily News as well. Oh, that's great. And Brian, people thought you might have an idea. We're looking for a Republican-y business type person. Now, he wasn't asking me. He said, do you have an idea? So I said, let me, and I went back to him. I said, and I mentioned a fellow named David Marston had been the U.S. attorney, and perhaps he would be a good one. I don't know him well. He's at such and such law firm. Oh, great. Thanks, Brian. So a couple weeks later, I got a call back, and this is now in early August. Hey, he was great too. Do you have any other ideas? So I suggested another prominent attorney here in town, Republican, very big in terms of politics and things like that. And he said, okay, great. And I did know his number. So I called that fellow up and I said, you're going to get a call. And thank you. And then a couple weeks later, it's late August, and I'm driving down in my 8-year-old Mercury Monarch from Meridian Bank, where I had my first big client. It's now 2 years into that. And I called my office, and back then, the phones were installed in the car, and yeah, Michael called again. So I called up Michael. Hey, Michael, what's up? He was good too. The show starts though in 3 weeks. And do you have anybody else you'd recommend? And I said, well, how about me? And he said, have you done any television? And I said, I was honest about it. I had said, yes, I was. I didn't tell him that what the television I had done is I'd been on the Happy the Clown show on Channel 6 when I was 6 years old. I was one of about 25 people who would be around the clown's feet, and I was on one show. But it was honest. I had been on television. Luckily, he didn't ask where or when. And he said, well, when could you come by? And I said, literally the next exit, I can be there in less than 5 minutes. So I met him, they gave me a test, and, Irv has passed, Carol has passed, others have retired, Mark Howard, and I'm the last remaining person on the show because I started so young, I guess. And it's the #1 rated show with the largest audience on Sunday mornings in Philadelphia in any time slot. We beat anything on ABC, CBS, NBC, cable, all Sunday morning. It has the largest audience. And actually, what's kind of cool about it is he gives me credit for this, and he's a dear friend. Irv Homer was the talk show guy. So occasionally Irv would say to me, hey, Brian, I'm going to be on vacation. Can you fill in for me? So it was great. Yeah, sure. But doing a 4-hour radio talk show, you had to prepare for 4 hours, and I had my own little business. But one of my guests was a friend of mine, and I was the fill-in guest host. And my guest commentator was Michael Smerconish. And Michael gives me credit for a fill-in host, had a fill-in guest. Michael loved it. He started to do more of the radio. Out of that, when you see him on CNN or you hear him on Sirius every day, he credits me for the start of his career. And that was me driving down the Schuylkill and saying, what about me? These things, that's why it's important to get out and about. So often, I encourage people that I work with and family members, et cetera, give it a shot. You never know. I had something recently, which was kind of, as you know, I crashed a party when I was 19 years old, and I met the most amazing woman, Maud Campbell, and we were together for 45 years, married for 41, and I lost her in 2021 to Parkinson's. But so it's been, part of it has been really, and luckily I've got wonderful sons and daughters-in-law and 4 grandkids and things like that. But, there's times when you so a couple of weeks ago, or maybe about 2 months ago, Natalie Merchant of 10,000 Maniacs was in town. And I really, nostalgically, that was a great band from the 90s. So, and I thought, she's going to be at the Kimmel Center. So I got 2 tickets. And then I was, and then I didn't have any, and then I thought, you know what, I might as well go. I'll go by myself. So I go there. Her concert was great. About halfway through it, she stopped. Natalie Merchant stopped. She looked at the crowd and she said, today I took a bus, and it was so much nicer than a New York bus. What do you call it, SEPTA? And people are yelling out, Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation. And then she said, and then I went to the Penn Museum on the University of Pennsylvania campus, their museum. And I used to be on that board for about 10 years. And anyway, so she said, and that was amazing. I loved it. Someday I want to go back and sing there. If anybody knows, can you leave your business card here on the stage? And I impetuously screamed out, I can help you with that. So long story short, I thought, I can't believe I just said that. Long story short, after the concert, as I'm getting out of my chair, Natalie Merchant's daughter comes up to me, introduces herself, and says, sir, may I have your business card? My mom would like to go. So I'm helping on trying to get that arranged. And I thought to myself, I'm so glad I went. Otherwise I would have stayed home. Here and if we can arrange it that she comes back and sings at the Penn Museum, that would be, and she'll ride a SEPTA bus and to get there. And that would be a wonderful moment. But again, that's the thing that I try to remind people, remind myself, first of all, but also remind those around me. Give it a shot, don't stay home. Go out, take a walk, go down a different road, try something new, read something you wouldn't normally read. I do feel like because of the algorithm, we all kind of are getting tighter and tighter in what we read. We're kind of marinating in a very small bowl, and we need to kind of open ourselves up to new ideas and things like that.
Well, you just said so many amazing things, and there's so many things that, there's so many great takeaways. And, one of the things that I remember from our first meeting that we ever had, as I said, back in the late 90s, you had just sold Tierney Communications, and we were having breakfast, and it led to this story that I actually put in my book, that I wrote almost a decade ago. And in that book, there's I have little call outs, and one of the call outs is, Brian Tierney told me something I've never forgotten. People don't hear you the first time you tell them something. Maybe it registers the fifth time. Don't be shy about repeating your message. And it is something that not only I have internalized and do myself, it's something that when I sit on boards of companies and I work with entrepreneurs, I constantly remind them, it's not the first time, it's not the second. Put it out at least 5 times, maybe 10 times. Tell your story, tell your message, because people are really busy out there, and it's really, really hard to break through, but you will if you constantly just keep putting it out there. And I always credit you for that. So thank you.
Well, thank you. It's true. And it's just kind of like, oh, I already said that, or no, give it a shot again. Because we're all busy, and, messages don't always get through. I mean, one of the things that, when we work with a client is to kind of help them work through kind of, okay, who you are, what's the competitive set, what are the key things that you think, and then, and this is from my first job right out of college. I worked at the Republican National Committee Local Elections Division. So we were sent to help with non-incumbent state house races, non-incumbent small town mayors trying to rebuild the party post-Watergate. I was 22 years old. They sent me to a 1-week training camp, and then off you go. It was really helpful because you would go into Livonia, Michigan, and well, the incumbent is really unpopular and I'm really well known. Okay, that's really well, okay. And then you do a little survey, not a huge survey, and you'd be able to say, actually, the incumbent is pretty popular and you're not as well known, but these things that you said were important to you, A, B, and C, if we focus in on those, they really seem to move things. So my boss used to call it between the commas, Brian Tierney, comma. What do you want the next 2 or 3 words to be, to define who you are, what your brand is, what you bring to the table? Today announced. And so that discipline, though, about that is really what we apply every day to our clients, too, as well. So let's tighten this message up so it really gets through, and let's find ways to get it out there in terms of social media, in terms of perhaps advertising, in terms of even what the brand looks like, in terms of things you sponsor and where you go. And then let's repeat it and repeat it and repeat it, because it needs to, to really break through. And I think that's always been the case, perhaps even more so now. You need to, tighten the message, know that it works because you've done some homework on it, and then just keep finding creative ways to keep getting it across.
It's fascinating what you just said, because the way that you work and the kind of tips and suggestions that you give to your clients are, I believe, very similar to what they were several decades ago. But here we are today at a time where just maybe the means and the way that you get it out is just different. And I think to me, that's kind of very interesting to hear you say that.
Yeah, I mean, you if we can get something into the Philadelphia Inquirer, the New York Times, MSNBC, whatever, that's great. But in addition, the content that you create, everybody's a publisher now. So let's talk about, how we create events, content, things like this, not ignoring the mainstream kind of traditional sides, but also trying to find other ways to do it. The other part of it is looking internally. I mean, one of the key things that I have been able to do, whether it be in the advertising business, when I was able to recruit Donnie Deutsch's creative director at first, who, again, the fellow Rich Russo, who didn't want to meet me, but would meet me in my hotel room. And then finally, the third time we met, I said, Rich, we got to get your family down here. Your kids are about the same age as my kids, 10 and 11. So, you're from New York. They'd have to all right, that makes sense. And then I hired a guy named Ralph Archibald, who was a Ben Franklin impersonator, to greet them in the surprise greeting at the 30th Street train station here in Philadelphia when they got off the train from New York. It's the Russo family. Daddy, they love us here. And anyway, but, doing those sorts of things and that's kind of how I've been able to, throughout, when I was, when we took over the newspapers, finding new people to, Bill Marimo to lead the Inquirer newsroom. He was at NPR, the head of news there, but was originally from Philadelphia and just legendary, Pulitzer Prize winner. Ryan Davis, who was at McKinsey, and but had been a journalist as a young man, went to business school, was at McKinsey, was able to convince him to come down and run Inquirer, what was then Philly.com, now Inquirer.com. And, we made changes, we did things, and he grew it from, again, 13 million page views a month to 93 million page views a month. I mean, so it's just, in keeping, and what happens too is once you do that and, walking around, like I used to go out to our plant in Conshohocken. At a manufacturing plant, we would be producing the New York Times every day, the Wall Street Journal, the Philadelphia Inquirer, other publications as well, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of items being manufactured in this huge plant. And I kind of enjoyed going out there, and I was told by people, gee, the CEO never has come out here at night. It's so great to see you, Brian. And it was like, I'm kind of like, if I owned a restaurant, I'd want to go into the kitchen, not to be the chef, but to at least like, oh man, to see how you guys do this. This is really cool. And those things really helped me. And in fact, the head of the Teamsters was the union that, was critical to the Inquirer, because you couldn't, and the Daily News, you couldn't get it produced and out delivered without their support. And in the past, the relationships had been sometimes tense. And so one of the earliest things I did when we were considering making a bid was to meet with the head of the Teamsters. And in the beginning, it was very arms crossed. What do you know? And we just started to talk. And, by me going to the plant and him hearing that, by me, there was one particular really wonderful person who had gotten ill, and I went and visited him in the hospital. And again, it wasn't like a big lift. It was just kind of treat people the way you'd want to be treated. Those things went so far. And so the head of the Teamsters and I still have lunch every couple of months. Here it is, I've been gone for 16 years. It's just, it's not just, a good way to do business. It's really more fun to do it that way, to get out there and meet people and experience things. And who knows, maybe Natalie Merchant will be singing in your office building soon or something like that. But yeah.
But I think the key to all of this, and you've hit on this so many times, and I'm so excited that we're having this conversation, is like you gotta stay and play. Like you gotta be out there. Otherwise, it won't happen.
Yeah, we call it tireless optimism, getting in the game. I mean, nothing is going to work on the locker room. Just if you stand in the locker room, let's get out there. And it's not just. I really want to go back to this too. It makes it more fun. It makes you can grow your business. You can attract the kind of people you want to attract. You can have a happier life by doing it this way versus, and believe me, I often think about what can go wrong, and I have to somehow kind of not overthink things. And then I've got to go into it. What the heck? Let's go. We can figure this out, And when I think about, the young boy and loving parents, but at times economics tough, and where things have gone. Like when we got called, it was interesting. When after the Pope came here in 2015, we were reached out by the church in Ireland, and because he was going to be there for the World Meeting of Families, so I flew over to meet the Archbishop and some of the business people there, and they were concerned about could they pull this off, the amount of money they had to raise, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things I did is, think, then you did some homework and you realize, well, the Pope coming to America was a big deal. I mean, a key part when the Pope came here was, and if you go to YouTube and you type in Pope Francis, Brian Communications, there's a short little video we created a few months ago to make people optimistic on the 10th anniversary of when, with all the good things happening in the region next year. And in it, Joe Neubauer, Brian Roberts, and David L. Cohen are in it, Dan Hilferty, and some others as well. But one of the things that when I got the call from the Archbishop, he had just been turned down by a major corporation. This was in Philadelphia again. We have to raise $35 million. We've only raised 12, and I just got turned down by the CEO of a major corporation because they don't do religious things. So I said, well, let me learn more. And then I went back to him the next day and I said, When we were trying to get a convention here in 2000, Republican convention, it was the Republican convention in the hall, but everybody thought it was exciting and all the corporate environment, soon the DNC's coming. What are you suggesting? What if you had Jewish co-chairman? And in 24 hours, I recruited Joe Neubauer, who is Jewish and actually was born in what's now Israel, Brian Roberts, David L. Cohen. And on the video, it's great because, Joe says, at first I thought, why would somebody want to do this? And it was a wonderful experience for everybody. And by doing it, it made it, and of course with this Pope Francis, he was so amazing in terms of being able to do that. So in the Ireland one, what happened is I went over there, met with them, and I can see why the people there were very nice, but I see the more ambitious type Irish moved over here 100 years ago, because sometimes it'd be like, has anyone called so-and-so? Oh, I got to get to him. But guys, he said he wants to make a gift. But anyway, so one of the things that we did is when I looked at it and it was like, okay, the Pope's going to be in Portugal the month or two before that, going to Europe. You met with different people over major corporations who were over there, have operations like Apple and others in Ireland. And came up with the idea of like, wait a second, 2018, that'll be 20 years of the Good Friday Accords, peace in Ireland. That's George Mitchell, Secretary of State. What law firm's he with? I knew somebody at his law firm here in Philadelphia. I've met him once or twice. Can he take a meeting? Long story short, we tied the Pope's visit to the 20th anniversary of the Good Friday Accords. George Mitchell was thrilled. The university that he's tied with, the University of Chicago got involved with it because they have a peace institute. And we helped them do they could in terms of the fundraising part of it, but also made it, not just a visit. It was to talk about 20 years of peace in Ireland and what the world can learn from that as a 2-day conference tied into the Pope's visit. So again, it's looking at something slightly different than others look at it. And great things happen when you do it that way, It's like, how about if we looked at it like this? Okay, yeah, maybe that works, But I remember coming back here and thinking, oh gosh, wait a second, the Good Friday Accords, that's right. That's going to be 20th anniversary next year. So.
Well, it's fascinating. So what's next? Are you bringing this Pope back for a Villanova basketball game? Is he going to be the ceremonial, throw up the tip off before the game? Like what's gonna happen?
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine that? I mean, talk about, wouldn't that be, first of all, what we're focusing in is, our existing clients and the World Cup, so we're going to have that coming up this summer. And not just that, I mean, it's 250th anniversary of our country. So what an opportunity to kind of celebrate, get people here who wouldn't normally maybe have come, see it, tour it, especially on the World Cup thing, again, because they say for every seat, there'll be 3 or 4 people from that country here. And having people being comfortable about it. And I do feel like in our region and in other parts of the country, even in this challenging time that we're in right now, because sometimes things feel a little bit scary, but the idea of like fundamentally, we've got a lot that unites us too. So let's just sit around the table here and, I think back in my early career when I was just out of college working in Washington and, a person like a Ronald Reagan, more conservative perhaps than other in the past, inviting Tip O'Neill, the Democratic Speaker of the House, down to the White House to have a beer and let's try to find some common ground. I mean, that's what we need to do as a country. That's what makes our country strong and fundamentally to lead the world as the world needs us to lead, not to dominate, but to help lead. It's to remind people that we've come a long way and there's a lot more great things ahead.
Well, I have a couple more things I want to touch on before we wrap up, but we could probably go on all day, Brian. But I mean, the thing, so what was it like as a young business person when you were running Tierney Communications? Your name's on the building of the Bellevue, as you said, where your mom had worked. I mean, it was like an unbelievable thing. And then a company comes in and wants to buy the business and your name, and leave it on the wall. What was that like?
Well, you know what? And they bought it. So it was a 3-year earnout. And then I had a 2-year contract after that. So I stayed for 5 years after the sale. So then I, did some other investing things like Nutrisystem I was involved with and doing some small consulting. And then we put together the group of people and bought the Inquirer and the Daily News and Inquirer.com. And then when I started this business, they had, it was still called Tierney. So I called this one Brian Communications. My friends will ask me sometimes, what's your middle name? I said, I swear to God, this is the last one. This is it. Although now they have consolidated it. The parent company has consolidated that, and it's now called Carmichael Lynch, though they've dropped the name Tierney in the market. It's a lot smaller than it used to be. And but this is, what I love.
Can you get it back?
I think they have to abandon it for at least 10 years or so. I'm not sure what the laws are in Pennsylvania, but this is, it's fun. Like, I'm really loving what I'm doing, and it's so. And I, inspired by a fella who was at the old agency, Bob Wilder, who had sold the agency, and then I later took it over. And he used to come in every day, even into his 80s. He had negotiated an office for life. They had him way in the back. I put him on Broad Street next to me because I found him really. He'd come in with a retired policeman, drove him in around 10. He'd leave around 3. And here he is in his early to mid 80s. And I remember sitting down with him talking about, and he said to me, I said, Bob, you've got this house in Jamaica and you've got a house down the shore and a beautiful house. Tell me about, and he said to me, Brian, my friends who totally retire, their minds get slow. And I love coming in here and having the opportunity to talk to you and to see people I know over when I go out to lunch. And I remember thinking, I was, 38, 39 at the time. I thought, I got to remember this because I do feel like that's a key part of it. I'd like to travel a little bit more, perhaps, but I love doing the work, and I love doing as well some of the nonprofit work that we do where you really feel like you're making a difference in somebody's life. There's a group called ElderNet that we support, and it's it's out in Lower Merion, and it's 2,500 people were taken to doctor's visits last year who otherwise wouldn't. And my wife had been a volunteer there for it. And she said, she really enjoyed it. She said, I feel like I'm taking a burden off of this woman's daughter, and nice having a conversation. And it took an hour and a half, 2 hours. So I'm enjoying doing those sorts of things too. I feel very blessed, but enjoying it too. So there's no upcoming retirement. I want to be in the game. I do want to play golf. Last year I only golfed twice. I used to golf more, and one of them was for fun. One was for a charity event. So I've got on my refrigerator golf 10 times this year. So anyway, but now we're getting towards April. I need to get moving on that golfing thing because I haven't golfed once yet. But anyway.
Well, look, I mean, as we wrap up the edition of our 76 Capital Sports Leadership Show, it's been amazing having Brian Tierney on our show. I mean, if the nuggets of knowledge that you've dropped, the things that you have shared has just been absolutely incredible. And as we roll into the summer here in 2026, we've got some really big things happening in the greater Philadelphia region. You mentioned golf. We've got a big golf tournament coming in. We've got the World Cup. We've got the Major League Baseball All-Star Game. We've got the Philly, the US 250. I mean, there's just so many big things happening. So as being one of the most influential people across the greater Philadelphia region, what's this summer going to be like? It's
going to be, I think, because we've shown as a region that we can host big things, whether they be the Republican convention, the Democratic convention, and there's so many cool things to see now that weren't around. I mean, the Liberty Bell, but then there's the National Liberty Museum where they have actually the second cast of the Liberty Bell, but this one you can actually ring, and historic sports memorabilia on exhibition, and there's just so many great things to do and see. So I think at the end of this summer, people are going to realize and this is kind of, again, it goes back to 25 years ago when I said that Philadelphians, when we launched Philadelphia Tourism, had a worse view of Philadelphia. People are more like, you know what, that sense of we are pretty cool, and I like living here, and my friends come from out of town and they really think it's great. And you know what? I'm glad I live here. And And so I think we're going to end this summer with an even renewed sense of optimism. Again, we're working as part of the group to try to get the 2028 Democratic Convention back, which would be amazing to have the second one back here with in 2028, and more great things ahead. When you think about in this regions, the headquarters of things like, Comcast, what they've done from just, small little cable business and what they do around the world that's so amazing. And Cencora and all the others kind of that are headquartered here that nobody would have thought maybe 25 or 30 years ago could possibly happen. So be optimistic, and on a national and international standing too, as well, outside of our region. We'll get through these periods. We've got great leaders. We've got great people. We're a great country because it's kind of as we started, right? All men are created equal, democracy, vote, et cetera, et cetera. We can do this.
Well, it's a perfect place to end this conversation. At this point, we have so much more to talk about, so much more we can do together, Brian. This has really been great. Thanks so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you, Wayne.
On behalf of the entire 76 Capital team, thank you for joining us for this edition of our Sports Leadership Show. Please remember to subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast network or on the 76 Capital website. You can also explore the hundreds of episodes we've produced over the past several years on those same networks. And as always, go out there and make it happen.